what happened on January 6th was in fact an insurrection against the government. It was in fact a terrorist attack against the Capitol. These individuals were domestic terrorists. They utilized criminality and violence in order to make a political point. That is your casebook statutory definition of terrorism. It fits 110%. Now, there are individuals who are being apologists for terrorists. Let's go ahead and call them what they are. They are terrorist sympathizers. That is who they are. Let's go to Fox News host Mark Levin. Mark Levin says January 6 rioters would be treated better if at Guantanamo Bay. In a June 13th episode rebroadcasted on Saturday, Fox News, Mark Levin claimed January 6 suspects are being treated worse than terrorists detained at Guantanamo Bay. Additionally, falsely claiming the charges against them have not been made public, which was a complete lie. Here's some of Levin's commentary.
What has happened exactly to the hundreds of people who were involved on January 6th, some of whom broke into the Capitol building, some of whom were on the Capitol building steps, some of whom were on the Capitol building grounds? What has happened to them? We're supposed to be a republic. We're supposed to be a free country. We have a constitutional system. We have due process. Take a look at the Constitution. We don't have secret trials in this country. And yet, what has happened to these people? We get little spurts of information here and there from the 2 or 3 independent reporters, none of whom were associated with big media or big tech, who were bothered to look into this. What are we hearing? We're hearing that we have more FBI resources applied to this than to anything else. That people are being rounded up all over the country and being charged in some cases with misdemeanors. We have SWAT teams that are being used to collect people and bring them back to Washington. We're hearing that they're in some of the worst jails and that some of them are being put in solitary confinement where they only have an hour where they can go outside, if that. That they're being fed poor food. They're being treated like they're terrorists, and at Guantanamo Bay, where they'd be treated actually better.
I want to remind you that Mark Levin never defended nonviolent individuals who are black and brown currently in prison under unimaginable circumstances, even though whites who were convicted of the same crime were able to receive probation or take a very fluffy plea deal. He's not concerned about them. He's concerned about the terrorists. The only reason he's concerned about these terrorists is because not only are they white, but they also represent an ideology that he believes in. Kenya, your thoughts?
Khalif Browder served 3 years in prison without ever reaching trial for being accused of stealing a backpack. If we want to talk about the inequalities, if we're talking about the injustices that exist in our criminal justice system, folks who made a conscious decision to storm the grounds of the US Capitol to overthrow the US government in the midst of its transition of power is not one of them. And I know that network isn't typically rooted in fact or reality, but no amount of revisionist history can allow them to erase the lived experiences of a mostly black and brown city of Washington, D.C. that had to experience it. And knowing that I'm only 2 miles away from that Capitol, remembering what that felt for communities of color, black communities in the DC area, to have helicopters over your house, to have the streets completely martial law in your own community, in your own street, for those who came from rural America or came from all over America because they feel as though those of us who look like me, those of us who look like you are taking over. You cannot erase those experiences, and no amount of revisionist history is going to negate that. It also doesn't negate that the data is showing us that there were far more police presence at Black Lives Matter protests throughout the year in 2020. What we saw at racial justice protests all across the country. And if we're really making a direct comparison to Guantanamo, we're looking at years of organized abuse, years of organized torture that received global condemnation to the point that currently the current president of the United States, the very administration that the former and that those who congregated and joined up and tried to take over the US Capitol were trying to disrupt, they are now trying and adamantly trying to finally close that base. If we're really making that general direct comparison, let's really unpack the criminal justice system. But we're not talking about that for folks who actually care about when those of us who look like me and look like you, or look like Khalif Browder, as we know, they're not talking about those issues. They're not talking about the injustices that exist that allow people to stay behind bars without ever being convicted of a crime, because it's insincere and we know who they're peddling to.
Yeah, a few years ago, the Department of Justice released a study that said the greatest domestic threat is white supremacists becoming members of law enforcement. The reason why they said this was the greatest domestic threat is because, in fact, these white supremacists are terrorists. And they bring a terrorist ideology to a position of public trust. Now, Mark Levin says that is not a threat in this country. Here's more of what Mark said.
Part of what's going on here is the media and the Democrats and Biden want you to believe that this is part of a white supremacy movement. Neo-Nazis and Klansmen. It's not true. But if it is true, tell us who exactly are the neo-Nazis and the Klansmen. None of us support them. But they use this phrase, white supremacy, to attack our entire society under this critical race theory. And so they move in and out of the language, move in and out of the definitions. It's white supremacists. It's the greatest danger we face in this country, according to Biden. Now, actually, those massive nuclear warheads that are aimed at our major cities by China and Russia, and the ones that Iran wants to get with the support of the Biden administration, that's the greatest threat we face, ladies and gentlemen.
That man is a damn shame, just as a human being. As a human being. On June 5th, the DOJ revealed that approximately 465 defendants had been arrested in connection to the attack, with more than 130 charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers or employees, including 40 suspects who have been charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon or causing serious bodily injury to an officer. That's just what they did to other police officers. And I guarantee you, these individuals did not act in silos.